What's up, everyone? Welcome to BJJ and Brews. This is episode 67, and we have a very special guest today. I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to get a hold of Robert Degle, and it was one of those things. I just sent him a message kind of at a random time, and as I said to him, I kind of shot my shot, and he was kind enough to say, hey, man, I'm down, let's do it. And we actually recorded later that day, of all things. So thank you so much, Robert, for making the time. I really enjoyed the conversation, and like I said, I'm a huge fan of your work and your approach and your contributions in terms of, your breakdowns and how you view jiu-jitsu and your thoughts on it. So I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you'll all enjoy listening to it. We're going to jump right into it. Before we do, real quick, shout out to our sponsors, Crown Rash Guards. You can check them out, www.crownrashguards.com. You can also find them on social media, Instagram and Facebook at Crown Rash Guards. Be sure to use our promo code BREWS, 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 for 20% off your next order. They make durable, sleek, as I like to say, Wakanda style rash guards that look brand new, and I've been using them for months now, and they look just like how they came in the box. So check them out, crownrashguards.com, and let them know that we sent you over there. Guys, this is our interview with Robert Degle. Enjoy, leave a comment, share, and we'll catch you down the road. All right, so we are here. I am joined with Robert Degle. And I really appreciate you making the time on such short notice to hop on the podcast. I just kind of reached out. I shot my shot. And you're like, yeah, I'm down. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, awesome. So listen, you have a very, I think, unique presence on social media when it comes to like jiu-jitsu practitioners. I always find your long form breakdowns of video and techniques, specifically on your story. You've been watching a lot of wrestling recently, and I found that really interesting. What got you, like, how did you form, and I don't want to talk about branding so much, but what got you to say, this is what I like to put out content wise on social media and contribute to the jiu-jitsu community?
Well, it's an interesting question because, you even brought up the word branding. I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts on the topic of, I came into this sport not with the mindset of being a businessman. Like, that wasn't what appealed to me. What appealed to me was, like, I like research with a minimum of ambiguity involved. So I was studying philosophy, and I was pursuing a career in teaching that, actually. Funnily enough, I have right next to me. I just happen to have this right near me. So this is the Philosophical Investigations by Ludwig Wittgenstein.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it just was like right next to me. But anyway, so the issue with philosophy, at least if you take Wittgenstein's views seriously and thinkers associated, I shouldn't say associated with him, but thinkers related to him, is that there's a real lack of purpose and focus to it. So there's so much ambiguity in the discipline, right? I won't get too deep into that, but I'm just talking about like my own personal thoughts about it. So I really like research that doesn't have ambiguity, which is to say, so let's say when we ask a question, right, and we want to research the answer to that question, if we can answer it in specific measurable ways, to me, I like that way more because it's much more, the research is more focused. There's like a goal to it. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. My bad. There's like a goal to it, right? Like it does. Yeah. It doesn't meander into like stupidity, right? Like let me give you an example. Let's say you and your friend are in like a super intense debate about like the greatest Star Wars character of all time. Like ultimately, that's just your opinion, man. And people get really heated about those kinds of conversations. And I brought up a silly example, but people get into like really intense arguments about that because like what they do is they start a conversation where there is no specific measurement by which they can establish the veracity of the claims involved, right? So, okay, for instance, if like this is just a really simple claim, like okay, if we say who is taller, Ben or Bill, right? That's we can measure that, right? But if we say who is a better person, Ben or Bill? Oh, there's a level of ambiguity there. So what I like about jujitsu, what appealed to me about it, was that I was studying philosophy at the same time, and that's what I thought my career was going to be in. But I started to see in jujitsu this. I always loved jujitsu. I was very, very into it, even when I didn't think I was going to be teaching it professionally. I just really loved it. But I started to see it as a way for me to engage in research without the ambiguity of philosophy. Now, I went full time when I had no social media presence. I dropped out of graduate school and I started pursuing philosophy. Started pursuing jujitsu primarily because my coach gave me the confidence that it was possible. Okay, I had no social media presence. I was some random loser in the blue basement who nobody knew about, and a friend of mine, a teammate of mine, he always likes to. He's very insistent. He's like, you always got to mention it was me that told you to get social media. So it was Mike Rockshan. So his Instagram handle is Cool Rack. So if anyone's listening to this, you could DM Cool
Shout
Rack
out
and
to
be like,
Mike.
yeah, Rob's giving you the appropriate credit. He wasn't the only one, but he's always like he always like brings up that he did push me pretty heavily to start a social media because like I was like I didn't have an Instagram. I had no social media. I wasn't interested in it. You know, but I went full time in jujitsu. With I don't recommend this to people. I don't recommend going full time in jujitsu before you have tested the social media waters because quite frankly, what I've subsequently learned is a big part of your career is going to be contingent upon that. So anyway, so I very like reluctantly made a social media because I was like, well, you're probably right. I got to brand myself. Like I was, you have no idea how stressed out I was at that point in my life about like money because I was like, here I was trying to make a career in jujitsu. Not really sure financially how I was going to do it, but I knew like I was teaching classes at a few schools and I also was working. So that's how I was paying the bills. And I didn't really have like a direction in terms of like where my career was going to go per se. I just was of the mindset, keep getting better, keep improving, win tournaments, gain respect, make money, right? But that is how it works, but that's not the only way how it works, is what I've realized. So I started my social media, and at first I was like, I didn't really know how to use the platform. I was like, I'm not sure what I should do. And what I started doing more or less soon enough was I was just like, I'm just gonna like do what I'm just gonna post like what I'm actually interested in. Like I'm not gonna try to be like there was one point where I thought about like should I be like a shit talker? Will that boost my brand? I don't I don't know. Like I'm not naturally interested in shit talking. Now I am naturally some people will tell you that I am interested in shit talking because unfortunately being from New York, I'm very naturally argumentative. Like I don't I've started some arguments with people that I probably should not have, and if I think I'm right, I'll keep going. But like, it's to me that's a shit talking. It's just like a point that I think I'm right about, so I'll just like keep going on it. But like, so for me, it's like when I put out stuff on social media, it's just because that's what I'm interested in. Like when I put out those stories talking about just technique and everything, man, there are a lot of things in jujitsu that I just find not interesting, and a lot of, to me, what's the most interesting thing about jujitsu is that what's wonderful about it is you don't have to take people's word on it. You don't have to take my word on it. Just go out and look, evaluate the evidence. The difficulty with that is that quite frankly, it takes a long time. There's a lot of stuff to watch, to really get a good sense for what's happening. You have to be very patient with studying. And unfortunately, I have nothing better to do. This is my job now. So I spent a lot of time watching tape, a lot of time studying. And yeah, so I see my content that I put out. Now, look, I'm not going to lie. Like, I put out like technique videos, right? That's not, to me, that's like the candy of social media, right? That's not that. I mean, you can learn from it, but it's not that substantive, right? The really substantive stuff I put out, in my opinion, is the more instructional content. My actual instructionals or my stories where I talk about tech. I'll post. I'll post like like a match and I'll break down what's happening. Like I really love doing that. That to me is like, because I don't like, there's two things I really don't like, and they're very connected. I really don't like people who take things on authority. I don't want to listen. I don't want people to listen to me because they're like, well, he's a big name and blah 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 blah, right? Like it's not important. You should be listening to me because because I should be able to show you. I should be able to cite and match examples. When I used to teach in New York, I would always tell my students, if you don't believe something about what I'm saying about a technique, ask me and I will cite match examples, and I want you to go look those match examples up. I want you to go see for yourself. Okay. Um, and now, of course, like in a class, 30 students, or each one is like, oh, I think that's bullshit. I think that's bullshit. It's going to bog down the class. So there's like a limit to this, of course. But like, the more advanced guys you've got, I'll always do that for. Like, I want to cite examples. Okay. So I don't take anyone's word on authority, and I don't want anyone to take my word on authority. So those are the two things that are associated, right? It's like basically the same thing, but it's just me and other people. Don't take my word on anything. If you don't believe what I'm saying, ask me for evidence. I do this all the time. People in DMs ask me questions. They're like, what do you think about this? And I'll tell them, and they'll be like, really? Why do you think that? I'm like, well, and I'll send them, check out this match, check out this match, check out this match. Because that's what's wonderful about jiu-jitsu, because we have, like, contrast jiu-jitsu with, and I'm not disparaging this other martial art, but contrast it with Aikido. I think Aikido is fine, but it's not evidence-based, right? Aikido is more of like personal cultivation. You know what I mean? It's not really about like actually learning fighting skills. Jiu-jitsu is wonderful because there's evidence that we can use to, rather I should say there's data we can use to create evidence, which that is going to tell us where to go. So yeah, so what I try to do is I try to, on my social media, not fall prey to, it's like, I want to respect the intelligence of other people in the community. Okay. Because what I could do is I could just put out dumb marketing content, which is what I think the vast majority of people do. Most people are doing that. But what I like to do is I like to look, it's like they're just putting on stuff that is just like, oh, this is so bad. And I think it's bad. There's a lot of people that are really good that put out bad techniques and they know it's bad, but they're just like, these idiots will know. They're gonna watch it anyway. And it's like I try to assume the intelligence of my followers, and even sometimes I think like, well, maybe it's a little too technically complex and intricate. I try to put it out anyway because I want to view what I'm doing as being a researcher who is surveying the available evidence. And the reason I have a job is because I have the time to do that. Maybe other people don't necessarily have the time to do that. So I'm doing that for them. Okay. And then when they ask me to cite my sources, so to speak, I ought to be able to do that. So that's really what I'm doing when I put out those stories. In a sense, I'm citing my sources. You get what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious, like everything you just said is funny because
Mm.
I studied computer science in my undergrad. I ended up double majoring computer science and mathematics. I'm very much I
Mm.
like I like to prove that I'm right or prove that you're wrong. I know it sounds kind of egotistical. I'm right, you're wrong, but you get the idea. Like
Yeah.
I liked the black and white nature of being right, especially in mathematics, and I hated the subjective nature of papers. So the part of the
Mm.
reason why I went to computer science was I was interested in computers, but I wanted to avoid writing papers. So I got
Okay.
into it and I ended up loving it, and it became my career. But I guess my question is, my first question is this: how did you stay with being a philosophy major, given that you have such a scientific, empirical approach to everything? I feel like they're contrasts. And two,
Yeah.
when you come to the point of evaluating techniques and their validity and showing proof, how much of that is film study and how much of that is I have to myself perform the move, both, let's say, just to
Mm.
feel the technique and then also with a fully resisting opponent to see the legitimacy of it?
Yeah. Great. Seriously, great questions. Very good. Okay. So first one, I feel like many people with my philosophical viewpoint, I was essentially duped into philosophy by philosophy. Okay. So what do I mean by that? It's a little complicated. So um, So I have right here next to me. I have right here next to me a bunch of Wittgenstein books, among other things. I've got the Philosophical Investigations. I've got the Tractatus. I've got Culture and Value. I've got The Duty of Genius, and then I have a couple other books. I have the Zhuangzhou, which he was a Chinese philosopher who was similar to Wittgenstein in a lot of ways, I think. So okay, Wittgenstein once described philosophy as not being something he was curious about, but rather it was something that attacked him from behind. Little bit of a Freudian slip there, but so in a sense, I feel the same way about philosophy that he was describing it for him. When I was younger, I found myself constantly being struck with these what I understand now to be metaphysical questions. So, for instance, one of the questions that I'm sure a lot of other people have thought this. I thought this when I was really young. I was like 12 when I first thought of this, and I later learned the actual name for it. So, there is a philosophical, again, a question of epistemology that is like, okay, how do I know that what I perceive to be green, you also perceive to be green? And how do I know that you don't perceive it as blue? Well, what you could say is, well, you could just ask them what the color is. Well, but if I my whole life have seen it as green, and you your whole life you've seen the same color shade, but you learn it is what I would refer to as blue, but you've always seen it as green, so we both call it green. The question is, how do we know that that's not happening? Well, that bothered me. I remember thinking that. I'll never forget when I first thought that. I was on the Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger ride in Disney World, and I was looking at one of the aliens, and I thought that I was like, the blue of that. Why do I not? I don't know why this happened. I just thought this, and so frequently throughout my life, I've had these moments where I'm just
And
like,
then, and sorry to interrupt, but at
okay,
that point, you ask yourself, is the artist like Monet or Picasso, are they seeing a different color spectrum than us that allows them to be so artistic with their color palettes? And then you really
yeah,
go off and deep because I actually had this exact
right,
same thought, not at the same young age as you, but I was thinking that too. If is
yeah.
my red the same as your red? Is my blue the same as your blue? We don't know.
Well, so I don't want to go too deep in the question because I'm more. It'll take forever, but I will briefly give like an idea that you can think about. It's like okay, what I learned is that it's actually what Wittgenstein would refer to as a spurious metaphysical speculation, which is to say, it's a sort of question that actually there's a level of ambiguity to it that renders it unanswerable. There's no real answer to the question we can give. All that matters ultimately, as Wittgenstein and others argue, is about use and practicality. To what extent does solving these problems affect our everyday lives? And there's a lot of complicated baggage that goes with that. But anyway, so I think the reason why I stuck with philosophy is because from a young age, I wanted answers to what I perceived to be the big questions of life. And I didn't want to proceed. So Wittgenstein describes it as like he doesn't want to proceed forwards until he's gone far enough backwards. But the problem is, what you learn as you really pursue philosophy honestly is that there is no end to the amount of time you can go backwards. It's the problem of the infinite regress, right? Every answer gives you a new problem. And so you just keep going backwards and backwards and backwards. And what you do is philosophy, in a sense, starts to become divorced from everyday life. Like modern academic Western philosophy is very pointless, in my opinion. Like the vast majority of the topics being discussed are very, very pointless. And academic philosophers try very hard to pretend that what they're doing matters. Like they're like, no, actually, it has like really serious value in like artificial intelligence. They always bring up artificial intelligence as like a justification for what they're doing, but it's very pointless. Um,
Is it
so
pointless or abstract?
I would say it's pointless. Like it's pointless because it's not just abstract, because abstraction
Okay.
can have a value. It's pointless because I think they're asking questions that aren't actually in fact real questions. Like the problem of the inverted spectrum, the problem that I was alluding to earlier, that's actually like a false problem, because what it means to say that a color is a color, if you take Wittgenstein's account of it, which I agree with, is that use determines the meaning of a word is its use in language. So if I refer to it as green and you refer to it as green, and communally that allows us to cooperate to achieve shared goals, it's green. Like that, there's no other sense in which it can be green. That's what it means to call something green. So spending endless time trying to figure out the metaphysics of it. Is it actually green? Is it this? It's pointless. And there's so many questions that are like that are genuinely, in my opinion, they are abstract, but abstraction has a value. Abstraction in and of itself is not bad. It's just what I would refer to as speculative metaphysical questions are um, misleading at best. I think there's certain questions, they're valid questions. I thought of them as a child. I've thought of them my whole life, right? Like, for instance, a metaphysical question that I think people ask all the time is, does free will exist, right? This is a very natural question to ask. You know, the answer to the question is there is no answer to the question. And people don't like that. They're like, there has to be an answer. There has to be an answer. I don't want to get too deep in the woods on this, but my opinion is there isn't actually an answer to the question. And anyway, so it's funny that you are educated in computer science. I wish that I had done computer science instead, actually. I think I would have been much better suited to it. A big part of, yeah, a big part of why it was not that difficult to dissuade me to switch to jujitsu from grad school was that I was getting a lot of pushback from my professors about a lot of the things I was interested in. Like Wittgenstein, I don't know if your listeners are aware, is not popular in modern Western academia, especially not in America. They really hate him. Wittgenstein, I was very interested in. Ironically, I was interested in the American pragmatists. They're not very popular right now in America, and I was interested in certain strains of Chinese philosophy, especially Zhuangzhou, and they're don't even bring that up. They don't want to hear that at all. So I was advised to. A professor told me. She said, if you want a career, I recommend picking something popular right now, writing about that, and then someday you can write about Wittgenstein. I was like, why am I going to do that? What's the point? I don't. I went to grad school because I wanted to pursue research topics of interest to me. And Wittgenstein's, in a sense, he's something of an anti-philosopher, more of that than a. Hold on one second. Okay, so whenever, what was I talking about? I don't remember.
Oh, so you were talking the first half of, yeah, the first half. So I asked you a two-part question, and you were talking about the philosophy side of how you got attacked from the back, so to speak, to get
Yeah,
into philosophy. And then the second part of my
yeah.
question was, how do you validate the techniques that any technique in terms of being legitimate? Is it primarily film study, or do you need to yourself do the technique both yourself just to feel it, and then also against a fully resisting opponent to see if it's actually applicable? Or is just seeing a video of high level guys hitting it various times enough evidence for you? What to you is like a critical mass of evidence to say this is legitimate and can be applied at the highest level?
Well, the tricky thing about jujitsu data curation, if you will, is that it's not super organized. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you will have, a lot of things that are worth watching on different websites, and you got to pay to get different websites. Sometimes the things are recorded poorly, sometimes they're not recorded at all. So a lot of what you're doing when you're studying jujitsu is, and also I will say the lack of a consistent rule set sort of messes things up, if you will, because you constantly have to evaluate, like, to what extent is the rule set influencing this. There's things like that you have to take into account. There's actually advantages and disadvantages to that. The advantage of having a bunch of rule sets is that people try different things, so you get more stuff to look at. You can evaluate more data. That is an advantage to it. But so for me, it's always a balance between watching stuff happening in matches and also testing stuff out in person. I always balance those two things. I think everyone should. I think you're always going to be doing both, where you're going to watch stuff, you're going to go, okay, that's interesting. Did that work just because the other guy didn't know the defense, or was that actually proactively forced? Then you've got to figure it out. You got to go and watch, try to find more examples of it happening. Go to your training partners, try it out on your training partners. In time, if there are good defenses and they're intelligent guys, they'll figure stuff out. So you try it over and over again. They come up with new problems for it. So I have a guard that I play a lot called reverse shin on shin. It's one of my favorite guards, and the system for that guard has proliferated a lot because intelligent and creative training partners have come up with different problems for me. And then I've seen in matches, I go, okay, interesting. That guy's doing that in this situation. That's kind of similar to the reverse shin on shin. And I think, could I plug that into my system as a potential solution to these problems I'm facing? And it's, I went on like I'll give you a specific example. I went on a really deep dive on the donkey guard actually for like 2 days. I was watching everything I could on donkey guard. And I was very convinced. I was like, I think Donkey Guard can be used to solve one of the problems of the reverse shunajin. And I was very convinced of it. And I still think it can if you have really long legs, which I don't. So I went for like 2 days, like of really like long research. And I was like very, very like, I was like, I think Donkey Guard can work here actually. Donkey Guard's this wacky, crazy thing everyone like laughs at and makes fun of. And I was like, I think this is a use for it. And then I went to the training room and I tried it out. And within like 2 rolls, I was like, nah, it's not good. So it sort of got debunked, if you will, and that's good. It's not a bad thing. And it's kind of like it's sort of like a funny story of like, did I waste my time? No, I don't think I wasted my time because there's always going to be, what I did was I didn't waste my time, so to speak. I just learned that that's not really a viable strategy. But to me, that's the fun part. It's like, you've got to always you got to go down those rabbit holes. Otherwise you're never going to find out what's there. You know what I mean? So it's fun to me. But anyway, so kind of like I'm not giving a great answer, I think, but you got to give attention to both film study and actual like in-person like testing. You know what I mean? It's always a balance.
Okay. Now, on that point, one thing and I'm sure, I mean, you've had countless more hours on the mats and studying stuff than I have, but I found coming from another sport that one thing about jujitsu that I think, this is my personal opinion, it's a very young sport, and the coaching methodologies I think are still very immature, and there's a lot of maturation that can happen. And the example I cite for that is your typical jujitsu. Typical. I know there are exceptions everywhere, but to me, the typical jujitsu class is you go in, you learn some techniques. Maybe you learn it as part of a system like this is De La Hiva guard. This is how you maintain the guard. These are the attacks and sweeps you can do from that. Potentially you get even that. But it's still, if you were to build a concept map of your jujitsu game, you're filling in all these individual nodes, and there's no just basic principles like, let's say, posture, center of gravity, stuff like that. Because I'm starting to think, just like the other sports I've competed as, like, even if I'm a day one white belt, I think the instructor, me again, could start instructing very general principles and concepts that would allow that person to do better jujitsu just following those. Like, if you have a good posture and you keep your elbows tucked, you're better off than just opening your elbows and doing, like, there's stuff like that that I feel like they could be explained. Now, that's my opinion. You obviously have been in this longer. What I'm wondering is, do you think it's possible that jujitsu is being, right now it seems super complicated with thousands of different techniques? Do you think it's possible that jiu-jitsu could actually be really simple and we just haven't figured out, or the majority hasn't figured out how to simplify it enough? Like, what are your thoughts on that? I'm not trying to pigeonhole you. I'm just trying to get you into that area.
No, that was a fantastic question. So basically, you brought up two things I want to touch upon. Okay, so the first one is that I'm curious about what sport you played, because my suspicion is that you played at a pretty high level, probably, right?
So I played collegiate tennis. So I played tennis since I was like 7, all the way through college and beyond. And I actually made it farther as a coach. So I coached, tennis academies with professional players in a couple spots in the world. So one of which was IMG Academies in Bradenton, Florida. I don't know if you're familiar with IMG Academies, but anyway, that was my backgroround. And posture, stance, mechanics, that was like the key.
Right.
And then how you actually do a specific technique, that's the own person's kind of flourish and what they bring attribute wise. So anyway, that's my background, but that's not important. We're here for you. I want to get your take.
No, it is important. I'm glad I asked, because have you ever on any other podcast heard me rant about how tennis and ping pong are the greatest games on the planet?
No, I have not. I didn't try to set you up. I honestly have not heard you say that.
No, I believe you. I am not a hardcore fan. Like, if you bring up names, I'm not going to know them. It's just on a conceptual level. I'm very interested in tennis and ping pong. So here's the thing. Here's where this sort of tension emerges with what you're describing. So everything you said about the development of skill and knowledge in athletes, 100% on point. And other more mature sports actually understand that. Every serious jiu-jitsu coach also understands that, whether they're able to consciously express it in words or not. The thing is, jiu-jitsu is not just a sport. It's also a lifestyle, right? So what it is jiu-jitsu has in many ways much in common with yoga. I would say it has more in common with yoga than it does with traditional sports. The goal of the average sports coach is one thing only: the production of high level athletes. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about, are you having fun? Are you having a good time? Are you enjoying the environment? These things are irrelevant in more mature sports. Now, they can do that, they can get away with that because what they're doing is the money they're making isn't coming from like having a school or something. I mean, like the students are all trying to win competitions, right? Like it's not about having like a club, if you will, right? I mean, maybe I'm sure there are the terms are probably wrong, but you get what I mean. It's not like a fun social environment. It's guys are here because they want to goddamn win. That's why they're coming to learn from you,
No, the
right?
difference, you're right. People are coming
Mhm.
in a competitive environment. People are coming because they're coming to the coach because they want to
Mhm.
perform at a high level and win. Whereas
Yeah.
traditional, like yoga studio people, and I say that with all respect, but your recreational jujitsu person is paying a membership fee to come for a
Mhm.
service. They're not coming there to win world championships.
Right.
They're coming there for a
Yeah.
service. Whereas a lot of times
Yes.
competitive athletes might be even competing to get the opportunity to be with that coach.
Yeah. So the trick is there's a dichotomy between, and here's, I actually think this is very interesting. I think there's perceived to be a dichotomy. I think a lot of coaches think, well, I've got to either coach in a dumbed down way that people will like, so they want to stay around and pay my bills, okay? Or if I'm too serious, they're going to get bored. If I talk about off balancing mechanics, they're going to get bored, right? I think a lot of coaches think this way. Now, I don't own an academy. I've never owned an academy. Someday my goal is to own an academy. And maybe I will be like, listen, I totally get it. You got to do that. You know what I mean? So it's possible that maybe they are all right, that you do have to sort of, in a sense, dumb things down a little bit. But I think that you don't actually. I think it's entirely possible to be a very serious coach, to do things in the way that you're describing, which is more commonly done in more traditional or serious sports, where the focus is not on like, you have like a class structure in jiu-jitsu is not really designed to optimize skill development, the traditional class structure. It is designed to make you feel like it's designed to entertain you, right? You're having a good time, right? It's almost like in a sense, I kind of find it's interesting to compare a jujitsu class, the average jujitsu class, to a video game. It's much more like a video game than it is to like a study session. You know what I mean? Like when you're studying, it's not always going to be fun. It's going to be you. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I love it, but that's just my personality. I understand not everyone is going to like that. Even a lot of people that are very good, they're not going to like sitting there studying for long periods of time. I like that, but a lot of people don't. So a class is more like a video game where it's just designed like there's like you gives you quick rewards, right? Like stuff like that. And so, but my question is like because the average jiu-jitsu person, it would be interesting to see the data on, if you took tennis, you took jiu-jitsu, what percentage of people who play tennis are doing so with at least some competitive aspirations versus jiu-jitsu. My suspicion is that in tennis, you would have your casual hobbyists. You do have that, obviously, but you would have way more competitors. So that's going to shape the culture. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, we have way more hobbyists. So that's going to shape the culture. Um, I just personally think that you can, like for me, I will say, if I never competed again, I would still want to train the way I do because it's more fulfilling to me. If I had a regular full time job, I would still want to train the way I do because it's more fulfilling to me. And I think there are actually more, I think people would be shocked. I think that real skill development, serious skill development is I think in the long term, much, much, much more rewarding. I know guys who don't train full time, who are very good, guys that for instance, train under, my coach John Danner. They've trained under him for a long time. They don't train full time, but they they train very seriously, and that's more rewarding to them. So yeah, I mean, it's like, I think that is a big part of it is like a cultural thing, and I think it's a cultural thing with some expectations in it, which I don't know, are they actually true? I'm not sure if they actually are. I just know from my personal experience that, like, I will talk about myself as a coach. I don't, maybe someday I'll go back on this one. I don't ever plan on being the guy to dumb things down. I like conveying information to people as honestly as I can. That's what I see my job as being. And the day I have to dumb things down is kind of the day I don't want to do this anymore. Because that's not how I envision it. If that's what I have to do, I'm not really into it that much. But I haven't felt the need to do that yet, and I don't think I will. I think there are a lot of coaches out there who don't dumb things down, so to speak, and are still very successful. Like, I'll give you an example. I was training at the academy of Carl Massaro, who is a black belt under Renzo Gracie, and he runs a very successful academy with a ton of like hobbyists. I don't think he dumbs things down. He has a very quick warm up. He goes through some very concise, effective techniques. He puts them into the context of a wider grappling game. He doesn't just show the moves and just like, all right, guys, go do it now. He explains like the wider contextual purpose of the movements, and then we roll, right? I think it's a much more like effective way to optimize a class for skill development versus like, you warm up for 30 minutes, you do 2 moves, there's no context given, and then you just do open rolling. It's like, it's not optimized for skill development, but it is optimized for fun. So, but my question is, I think we could do both. I think you can optimize a class for skill development and also have it be very fun and have it be an appealing consumer product, because ultimately that's how we're going to pay the bills. People are going to want to have to pay for it, So, yeah.
So if you were to start with a brand new student, so let's be hypothetical. You've opened your academy and you've got a day one white belt walking in the door. What would be the first thing you'd show him in jiu-jitsu or her?
Well, okay. What are the student's goals? The first thing I always ask a student, I always ask 3 questions when I get a first student. Okay. Or when I get a student, I say, how old are you? What do you weigh? What are your goals? Okay, these 3 questions are going to determine where I take the student. There's not like a single starting point. So give me like a random, like, create a character.
Okay, so in this case, let's talk about a 25-year-old male who just got out of college and is in average shape, not overweight. So let's just say, average athleticism, might have played sports recreationally, watched the UFC, and is interested in trying out jiu-jitsu and doing something, and probably doesn't like getting punched in the face. So they're like, I want to do this jiu-jitsu thing because Joe Rogan talked about it on his podcast.
Okay, so he doesn't really want to compete. Competition is not his goal.
Right now, no. Competition is not his goal. His goal is he first wants to do it. But obviously he wants to get better, because he walked in the door. But his goal is not, I want to be a world champion at IBJJF or ADCC or anything like that.
Okay, fair. Okay, so I would start him off, given what you've told me, probably with I'd probably teach him 2 things at the same time. These are actually the things I would usually start a student with: leg lock defense and pin escapes. I would teach him those are the 2, in my opinion, most fundamental defensive skill sets: leg lock defense and pin escapes. And then after that, I would shift probably to guard retention, and then also probably I would teach him back control. So those would be usually the first things I teach a student. So again, it'll change a lot depending on like what their goals are.
Yeah. Obviously, you can imagine that conventional wisdom would be like, you're teaching leg lock defense to a day one person. That's insane. That I can imagine a lot of people saying that. So what's your rationale for teaching pin escapes? I'm 100%. To me, it's logical. Just on a side note, for me, like when I started jiu-jitsu, where was I? I was on bottom side control. What did I get? What was the first skill I got to develop and improve upon? Getting out of side control. What was the first sort of system I had to learn? How to get out of side control? Like all that, just because of the nature of being on bottom, I was forced upon that. Leg locks, generally are like, oh, you don't teach those to people until they're blue belts or something. So what's your rationale for doing that? Because I think it's really interesting. I love leg locks. So I'm kind of curious, like what's the rationale there?
All right. So the rationale is that in my academy, they're going to be getting heel hooks from day one. There is not going to be anyone who's not going to be doing heel hooks on them. So I find this like weird attitude about you can't teach leg locks until they're a blue belt, like very bizarre. What do you guys think is going to happen at blue belt? Do you think they'll magically cross a certain line and then like now it's safe? Okay. No, like safety in leg locks comes from two things: people respecting taps and knowledge, people having knowledge, defensive and offensive knowledge. And I think defensive knowledge ought to come first. So all of the same rationale you'd give for why someone ought to learn pin escapes at an early stage of grappling are the same reasons you'd want to advocate for them learning leg lock defense at an early stage of grappling, right? So in my academy, my hypothetical academy that doesn't exist yet, my academy, everyone is going to be doing upper body attacks to them and lower body attacks. I have heel hooked first day white belts and not. It's been fine. Their legs didn't explode because I know how to do the move slowly. I know how to control what's going on. I have in my entire life never accidentally injured someone with a leg lock. It has never happened accidentally. It's happened in competition on purpose, but that's their fault. They did that. Accidentally, I've never injured someone. Okay. And I've done like, I don't even know, at this point, literally probably thousands of heel hooks on people. Heel hooks and knee bars are my two favorite leg locks. And I've never accidentally injured somebody because I know how to do it with control and I know how to, basically dictate the pace of what's going on, right? If you know how to do that, they're as safe as any other joint lock. I will grant, yes, the consequences of not tapping to a heel hook are much more severe than the consequences of not tapping to a straight arm bar. The straight arm bar is going to heal. Your knee ligaments are not. But a shoulder, that's not going to heal. Your rotator cuff, you're going to need surgery on that. So why is that? Why don't we ban, no Kimuras until purple belt? Why not? It's cultural. That's the only reason why. And, I just know from personal experience, like, look, I had a student once, I forget this kid's name. He was so funny. I had a student who was very interested in leg locks, and he was like a brand new white belt. And as kind of like a little experiment, the only thing I taught this kid was 50-50 heel hooks for like 6 months. That's the only thing I taught him. I was like, let's see what happens with this kid. Man, I wish I remembered his name. One of my old students is gonna watch this and be like, that was his name. But the kid was so funny. And he was like, and he wound up getting really good at that one thing, and he was good at nothing else. And like no one ever got injured because all of my students knew. They all learned the defenses. They all learned the offensive moves, and it was a safe, respectful environment. So I think the most important thing at an early stage is defense, and I think the most important early defenses, if you're talking about a complete grappling game, are going to be we got to have upper body escapes, we got to have lower body escapes. So it's going to be pin escapes, and that's going to be leg lock defense. And I want to be clear, there's different types of leg lock defenses. I would not teach a first day white belt how to heel slip. I don't think heel slipping is smart, even for heel slipping, to be honest, in my opinion, even if you're an upper belt, most of the time is stupid. Like, it's like you're risking your life. At that point, if they got you and they're good, you probably shouldn't get out. If it works, it's probably because they just don't know what they're doing. But other things like hiding your heel, knowing how to hide your heel, knowing how to stay safe positionally, these things I think are totally safe for anyone at any level to know. And I will say also, this is backed by experience. I have coached many people from an early stage and started them off with leg locks. Like I had one person who the only thing I taught this person was leg locks for I would say leg locks. I taught them leg locks, guard retention, leg lock defense, and I think some triangles. That was the main thing I taught them for like a year, and they were totally safe, no injuries, and they performed very well against other people who had been training as long as them. They had a big skill advantage in certain key areas, which led them. And even though this person was, this is a girl. She was pretty small, but she was able to do really well against guys because of her leg locks. So yeah. I know that's the common knowledge. You shouldn't, but I don't agree with it.
Well, I agree with you. No, I agree with you. I agree that most of the issues, if not all of them, can be attributed to ignorance, either on the attacker's end or on the defender's end, that leads to injuries. The title of this podcast is BJJ and Brews because its genesis was a bunch of us sitting around on the mats afterwards, like a lot of people, and somebody started drinking beers, and we'd have a beer or two and chit chat after a Saturday class. And if you said this, my natural reaction, because I will challenge you to some degree, is, but what about some schizo white belt that's hard to actually teach? Now you've told me I've taught tons of people and I haven't had this issue. I know you've encountered schizo white belts. So how do you deal with those personalities, whether it be the meathead or whatever, and make them safe very quickly so that they don't jeopardize the health of themselves or their training partners?
Yeah. I don't, again, so here's the tricky thing. It's a very interesting problem, but it's not a leg lock problem. That, in my mind, is a joint lock problem. And also,
no, I agree with you. It's not leg lock. It's everything. It's everything.
Yeah. And that's also just like a moron problem. Like you're a moron. So the issue is, so the solution to this, maybe instructors don't want to hear this. Yeah. The solution is cut them off. I give people a few chances. If you keep training in a reckless way, you're not allowed in my class. Get out of my class. I have kicked, not a lot of people, but I've kicked people out of my classes. Like, I'm not afraid to do it. If you are going to train in, there's a lot of people that don't understand how to train safely. But if after coming in and me explaining to you, listen, like I'll give you an actual example. I was rolling with actually a blue belt. This is absurd that a blue belt did this. I had this kid's back and he just proceeded to headbutt me. And he gave me a bloody nose. And I was like, bro, what are you doing? This was my class. Yeah. And I was like, you can't do that. And he goes, I'm just trying to get out. I'm like, so what was the escape there? Like, what was the plan to escape? With the headbutt me? He goes, no, I was trying to bridge to get out. I'm like, yeah, but man, you literally didn't bridge. Your hip stayed on the mat. Your head just went right into my nose. And so I told him, I was like, dude, you got to not do that. That's super reckless. You got to control your movements. You know what I mean? A big part of it is, I think, developing a culture in the room, a culture of, it's not about winning rounds. It's about getting better progressively. You got to develop a culture where, and I mean this seriously, this might sound like corny or whatever, but it's like, it's not about winning in the room. If you care about winning in the room, that's where injuries are going to happen, And the trick is, you're right. Sometimes people they're not going to be conducive to that. And that's when you have to be willing. You have to be willing to cut people off and say, like, I have told people, you can't come back. Like, you're training in a way, and for other reasons too. So there was a person who actually, I'm not going to say names or anything, but there was a person who threatened someone else on social media. So this person went on social media and threatened another student, and then this person came to my class. I was like, you cannot come to my class. I was like, I didn't own the gym that I was teaching. I was like, look, I don't own the gym. You can come to other people's classes, but you threatened another student. You were 100% not welcome in my class. So that person was not allowed back in my class, because it's all about safety, right? So that was a safety issue. People training like morons, that's a safety issue. Things like that. Like, basically, as a coach, you just got to heavily monitor and be on top of the attitudes, and the way people are carrying themselves in the environment. And you have to accept, not everyone will be conducive to a safe training environment. And what that might mean for you as an instructor is losing a membership. That sucks. But if someone's going to train in a way that is going to hurt people, you can't have them. You know what I mean? You gotta be willing to cut them off. So that's not a nice way to put it, but I think that's ultimately, I'm not saying right away. You give them chances. People don't know. I'm not saying you kick them out right away. You give them chances. You try to teach them, try to explain to them. If after, like, let's say 4 tries, like, the guy's still doing stuff, and especially if it's the same thing, if it's different things, that's more excusable, right? So I had a situation where I was rolling with a student, and the student tried to pass my guard, and basically what he did was he did a front flip onto my face, okay? And so, like, I told him, like, listen, I know you saw Mark Hunt do that in Pride. Yeah, I was like, you can't do that in class. You know what I mean? Like, you can't be jumping on top of me. And, like, first of all, that's not an effective guard pass. He didn't pass my guard. I just put my shins up and frame. Like, you're not going to pass people's guard like that, too. You're just putting people at risk. You cannot jump in the air like that. So one of the people I've learned the most from this actually is my coach, John Danaher. He has super strict safety rules. And if you do not abide by those rules, you are fucking told to walk out. Like, and he's super strict. He's, I would say, stricter than I am. Maybe I'll get to that point someday down the line. Maybe he's seen so much bullshit that he's like, I just have no patience for this. Like one of his safety rules is no pressure to the side of the knee when you're standing. So when you're going for a takedown, and he always shows examples of this before class, he says, you cannot put pressure to the side of the knee. Another safety rule he has is no jumping guard. That's a rule that I have in my classes. No jumping guard. Jumping guard is absolutely unacceptable. It is not an effective technique, and all it does is create severe injury risk. You know what I mean? There's other ways to pull guard where we don't need to threaten our training partner's ligaments every single time we do it. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, I've been going on for a while. I think you understand like where I'm coming from.
No, completely, and I think it's something that is like you said. I think culturally, we're probably at a certain place collectively, and to be a little stricter about protocols on the mat is deviating from that median a little bit. But I think over time, hopefully, as the sports matures, this goes back to our previous point. I think there is a good chance we'll get to a point where, for lack of a better term, it'll be more sport driven in terms of structure, both in terms of what's taught and what's allowed in terms of protocol and how we approach things. You mentioned offline, and I didn't know this, that you actually lived in Orlando for a period of time. And this blew my mind. And you said it's okay to ask, so I'm kind of curious. First of all, when were you down here? Where were you? Because I'm intimately familiar with the area. And if you were training, where were you training and who were you training with?
Okay, so I don't know where my apartment was. Like I don't know Orlando that well that I could like pinpoint exactly where I was. I remember what it looks like, obviously, but I don't really remember. It was in a gated community. So I was training at the Jungle. You know, Mike Lee and those guys.
Yep. Yep.
So I was training there. I really liked it. It was very good. Only thing I didn't like was they made you wear belts in the no-gi class. I was like, if it fell off in rolling, they'd let you keep it off. But I was like, then why can't we just like not even have it on? It was like, I thought it was dumb. But that's the only complaint I had. Otherwise, great academy. I love training with them. Very leg lock friendly. Really, really good environment. So I was down there in probably 2015, I think it was. So basically, what had happened was I wanted to live somewhere cheaper than New York. New York is very expensive. Okay. So I was like, where can I go that's not so expensive? You know, at the time I had been pretty close to finishing my bachelor's degree, but I was going to Queens College, but UCF has a good philosophy program. So I was like, well, I could transfer to UCF. I never wound up transferring. I moved down there and I was in Orlando for like 2 months. And I was only in Orlando like 2.5 months. I'll tell you why I left. I just got homesick. I was gonna
Aww.
go to UCF and then I wound up not having it. Yeah, I got homesick for New York. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's funny because in hindsight, I like Orlando. I mean, I like it a lot. I would say in my top five U.S. cities for sure. Like it's one of the only U.S. cities I would actually consider living in. Like I love the Orange County Central Public Library. Like that thing is fucking beautiful. That's like in my opinion the most beautiful library I've ever seen. It's better than any library we have here in New York. Here in New York, any better than any library in New York. But like, it's an awesome library, and like jiu-jitsu is very popular in Orlando, and on top of that, also, fun fact. I don't know if I've ever talked about this on a podcast. I worked at Universal Studios. That was like one of my favorite jobs I ever had. I worked at the River Adventure. You know, like the big water drop ride. Yeah. So I worked there, and I love that. I thought it was like a super fun, super like very easy job, like not difficult whatsoever. And like I got such a kick out of it. But I honestly I got homesick for New York, and on top of that, also I was like I had started at Henzo's And then I went to Orlando. I'd been at Henzo's for maybe, I want to say 6 months before I went to Orlando. And a big part of why I went back was Henzo's. Like, I remember I was watching. So this is how I could figure out when I specifically was in Orlando, because I was in Orlando when EBI Mexico happened. So I was watching EBI Mexico, and I remember, I forget which numbered event this was. I want to say like 13, I think it was. And I remember watching it and being like, damn, like, I want to be back training with the squad. Like, it's like, fuck, man, I really want to train with those guys. Like, I want to learn from them. And so, like, that was a big motivation for me to go back. And also, like, I grew up in New York. I'm very, like, nostalgic for New York. If anyone checks my stories, you'll see me, like, talking about New York all the time. It's I describe my relationship with New York like a bad relationship, like a bad girlfriend, like a bad ex or something. It's like, she's not good for you and you got to let her go, but it's like you still love her. Yeah, so yeah, I went back, and I mean, like, can I say that? I don't say that I regret it, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be doing jiu-jitsu at the level that I am now. Who knows what I'd be doing now? Probably would be teaching philosophy. I probably would have gone through with that and done that. But I didn't, so I'm here where I am now. And but I would go. Orlando is one of the only cities in the U.S., like I said, that I would definitely live in it, because I really like it overall. I love the theme parks. I like the library. The one issue with Orlando, no train system. You got to drive. I fucking hate driving, so that's the only issue. Otherwise, very nice
Yeah,
place.
public transport in Orlando is pretty rough. I mean, there is a bus
Yeah,
system. People do use it, but honestly, you do need a car to get around. It's just the sprawl, and it's how it is. It's funny you mentioned Universal because my main training partner, Victor, worked at Universal quite a bit. He's now at UCF actually, but for a long time he was working there, and he because of the way he could do his schedule, he would work like night shifts from let's say 10 to 4 or 8 to 4, like 8 at night to 4 in the morning, and then he could still train during the day and stuff. And he told me all these crazy stories about, because they would rent that park. I didn't know this. You probably know this working there. Is like the park, they'll close at a certain time and then rent it out for executive events for companies or for there's like a high school bash where they do it. And it's crazy, but it's a great, like you said, it's a great place to work, especially for a jiu-jitsu athlete because it gives you that flexibility of a schedule where you can train. Were you only training at the Jungle? Did you hop into any other gyms in the area, or were you training exclusively at the Jungle?
I was training exclusively at the Jungle. That was the only place I trained. Yeah, I liked it there, so I didn't feel a need to go anywhere else. And I also at the time I actually had I had a pretty bad hand injury, which really sucked. So my training was not as I was training and I was getting good training in, but it wasn't as consistent as I would have liked it to have been. So yeah, I mean I only had time for one gym, and also the injury kept me off.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sure. So Rob, we've been going for an hour. I really appreciate the time you've given to us right now. Before we go, I do have one little bone to pick with you.
Okay.
I've heard you profess your love for the Star Wars prequels, and
Yeah.
I am a diehard Star Wars fan. I've read so many of the books, starting with like
Mhm.
Heir to the Empire. This was in the '90s, before
Yeah.
they like redid canon and with the new movies and stuff. So when I saw Metachlorians and when I saw Misa Jar Jar Binks, like I wanted
Yeah.
to retch in my mouth, so to speak. So give me your case as to why you think the prequels are solid movies that are that should belong in the Star Wars universe. Because I want to hear it. I have an open mind. I want to be
Okay.
convinced.
Yeah. Okay. So I will say I also was a massive fan of the expanded universe, which now Disney has decided is Legends. I hate that term so much. It's so stupid. Like, I was a big fan of. I read Heir to the Empire. Like, I loved Thrawn. I like Timothy Zahn's books were great. Like, there's so many great expanded universe material that got rendered not canon by Disney, which sucks. I love Knights of the Old Republic, etc. Right. I watched the original trilogy when I was really, really little. I was like really small. Um, And I think I was like 7 when the first prequel came out, right? I saw that in theaters. I will never forget sitting in that theater and when the Gungans were fighting the droids. I remember thinking to myself, I can't believe movies can be this good. I was like, I had never seen a movie that good. I was like, I couldn't even believe it. And it's like, it's because like ultimately Star Wars is made for kids. Now, I don't think that's an excuse for the movies to be stupid. And I do think a lot of the criticisms of the prequels are totally valid. Like, I think the dialogue is awful. The effects are frequently terrible. The acting isn't good. The plot is like meandering. But it's like the reason why I like them is because there's 2 reasons. One, just on a spectacle level. As a kid, I'm watching these movies. I'm like, this shit is so fucking awesome. I was like, this is fucking amazing. Like, I remember when episode 2 came out, Attack of the Clones. I'm a big Boba Fett and Jango Fett fan. So I have right here this Boba Fett Lego that I got recently, which I'm going to be making.
Oh, badass.
Yeah, and I have in my luggage down there. I have a Jango Fett toy, and I actually brought this with me. I have like a Boba Fett toy. I have a bunch of like the bounty hunters and stuff. And I remember watching an Attack of the Clones when Django's a really big part. I was like, "Wow, my god, he's so fucking cool," and like so it was really like awesome as a kid. But now as an adult, I also appreciate them because I think that they are in a sense beautiful failures, if you will. They're like their goal is so epic. Their goal is to create this epic story of like a tragedy of the downfall of this man. And they're also hilarious because they're like not well made. Like I think on like a filmmaking level, like the acting is terrible, the dialogue is so bad. So it's like this amazing mix of like this genuinely like Shakespearean operatic story of like this character's like rise and fall, and it's so like powerful on like an emotional and thematic level. But then you have stuff like Anakin being like, I hate sand, it's coarse, it gets everywhere. Just terrible lines of dialogue. Like Anakin confessing to Padme that he just committed genocide, and Padme's like, it's okay to be human. Like, your boyfriend just told you he murdered an entire group of people. Like, so it's like there's just like to me it's just really fun because it's like it's got this epic amazing storyline, but it's got so many hilarious memes. So that's why I always say the original trilogy is the best trilogy on a filmmaking level, no question. The most fun trilogy are the prequels, and the sequels in my opinion shouldn't exist. So that's a topic for another day though.
So okay, so you're a massive Boba Fett fan, so I will fully nerd out, and we'll lose our entire audience at this point. But who cares at the end? Are you familiar? Because you read the extended universe. Are you familiar with the book Tales from Jabba's Palace, which was like a okay, cool. So yes. I was when I first found out that Boba Fett was a clone, it kind of like made me feel weird because I was used to the origin of him sort of being this outcast Imperial that put on the Mandalorian armor, and then he had this awesome story of getting out of the Sarlacc pit, and then later reappeared in, I believe, Dark Empire, which was like a collection of it was like a graphic novel where they first. Anyway, bottom line is, are you like, what's your feeling on how Disney has rewritten the canon, and are you like, let's put it this way. Do you prefer the original Boba Fett origin, or do you like the current one with him coming with the Jango Fett, the line, then what we've seen in The Mandalorian and how they've introduced him and retconned kind of his origins a little bit too?
So it's funny you bring up the Tales books because I've been hunting down for a copy of Tales of the Bounty Hunters because I read it when I was younger, and I gave away most of my Star Wars books. And that one is probably one of my favorites. I love the old Boba Fett backstory where he was Journeyman Protector Jaster Muriel, and he was on Concord Dawn and the whole situation where he had killed an Imperial senior or whatever, blah blah blah. And I really liked the way that the writer characterized him as kind of this sort of like he was kind of like a Clint Eastwood style. Like he wasn't really a bad guy, but he wasn't really a good guy, and he was like he had like a strict code of ethics. If you remember in that story, Jabba actually fucking it's pretty dark. Jabba gives Boba Leia for the night. He's like, you can rape her, and Boba's like, I'm not gonna do that. He's like, it's not ethical,
Yeah.
and
And
he says
he
it's
just sat on the side. Yeah, I remember that. He's
yeah,
like, "You're okay. You just sit. You have a sleep. I'm just going to sit here on the side." Very honorable kind
yeah.
of thing.
And they have a conversation about ethics where she's like, why don't you join the rebellion? And he gives this, and he doesn't agree with the rebellion. He thinks it's like he basically is like, I think Boba Fett was he's basically a fascist. He's basically a fascist who has like sort of like a code of honor still, sort of like a religious fascist, right? And so he's an interesting sort of bad guy character. So yes, I do agree. Some of that kind of got taken away by the clone stuff. But I think it's interesting to see how they kind of throughout the history of the character that so Journeyman Protector Jaster Muriel was retconned to be Jango Fett's mentor, okay, and then Boba at one point took on the name Jaster Muriel and became a journeyman protector on the planet Concordawn because he wanted to give up his life of bounty hunting. So that was still canon. They found a way to make it canon through like some loopholes and stuff. And so it's like, I don't know, I still like it. I think he's an awesome character throughout all his iterations, and like the crux of what makes him a good character is just that he's cool. Like that's really it. There's no depth to his character. He's just fucking cool. Like he's just like he only had like 4 lines in the original trilogy. And like I thought that the episode of The Mandalorian where he came back, like the big one, was fucking awesome. It's funny, like my story is the day that it came out, I was like, I was like, it's so good. Like it was so great. Like I loved it. And like I'm very excited for the book of Boba Fett. And just like a brief comment on like the entirety of the canon, I'm not really happy with what Disney's done for the most part. I think the sequels weren't very good. I think it kind of sucked. So they're kind of fun at points, but I didn't really like it that much. I think a lot of the canon destruction has been like pointless. I don't see why they had to get rid of all the canon. Like they're replacing with stuff that's just like mediocre copies. They're not even like it's not even new what they're doing. Like they got rid of Knights of the Old Republic and now they have the High Republic. It's like you're just copying what you got rid of. Like you could have just kept that around. But I don't know. They have their motivation, I'm sure, financially to do so. So yeah. Ultimately, the way I see it is that Star Wars is none of it's real. So like we can digest what we like and just ignore the stuff we don't like. Like I don't care about the sequels. Like that. As a Star Wars fan, I think you have to be willing to just accept you don't have control over the product, and if they want to put out stupid shit, you can just ignore it. So I take the stuff that I like, which is a lot of the old EU. I like the old EU. I like I like the Mandalorian. I like the original trilogy. I like the prequels. I I'm open minded as to anything. I'll try anything out, but a lot of the sequels and stuff related to that probably not gonna like. So anyway,
Well, I think on the last thing I'll say about Star Wars is uh, I think you're right. Like for example, like I'm really hoping that they tell like the Sarlacc story because I think Boba Fett
yeah,
escaping the
yeah,
Sarlacc is an awesome, even if that's just an episode in the series. I think you could condense that story into like a 40-minute episode and it would still be very fascinating.
yeah,
I think like Mara Jade deserves to be in, like she's such an awesome character that's so prevalent in the EU that I think they should bring her
yeah.
in. Um, but it's just I think like anything, it's like
She's not coming back. I think. I wish.
well, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I
It's
wish.
just
I don't.
odd.
I don't
Yeah,
think so.
it's just one of those things where it's like I think like anything, it's like a fan base got so, and I'm one of them because I was a big fanboy. It's like you
Yeah.
get viscerally attached to the material, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. It's last Star Wars question for you: what it could be anything. It could be I'm guessing it's going to be from the EU. What character or story that hasn't been included in the canon with Disney would you like to see told or retold in some sort of cinematic form, whether it's a miniseries on Disney Plus or a full-fledged movie? What would you like to see explored?
Well, I'll say what I would like, but I'd be scared. I'd be like, please don't fuck it up. Just like tell it the way it was told back then. Is Darth Revan from the Knights of the Old Republic? So the first Knights of the Old Republic, like that storyline. Anyone who
Okay.
played that game, yeah, that game was fucking awesome. That game has actually one of the best Star Wars stories ever. Like it's a very good. The storyline is one of the best parts of the game, and like he's such a fucking cool character. I'd be so scared Disney would ruin it, but I'd like to see it. And like, I think there's a lot of people speculate they are eventually going to make that because he's such a well loved character, and like, it's such a good story that like that, or even Knights of the Old Republic 2. I think the second one is really good too. Revan's not a big part of the second one, but the second one is also really cool. There's a lot of cool philosophy, like philosophical elements to that. So possibly one of those two would be the things I'd like to see the most, but I would be worried.
Yeah, I played both games and I thought they were great. And I know the second game was was kind of cut short, like development wise, that they had even more planned and they weren't able to finish it. But there's some community patches that restored like some of the dialogue and content that was unreleased in the original game. Um, Rob, thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, if you have any plugs or anything you'd like to give shout outs to, the floor is yours.
So if you guys are interested in following me, you can check me out on Instagram. That's the place where I'm probably the most active. It's Robert Degle, BJJ. My last name is spelled Degle. You can just put that in as like one word. If you ever got like technical questions, you can shoot them my way. And I got a couple instructionals out there. It's on my website, which the link is in my bio. It's robertdeagle.bjjonline.com. A couple different topics, so you can see if any of them appeal to you.
Awesome. Well, listen,
Yeah.
dude, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thanks for doing it on such short notice. It was just one of those things. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you
no
so
worries.
much.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And that's our show. So thank you so much for listening. Big thanks to Robert Degle. If you want to follow him, his social media is Robert Degle BJJ. That's at Robert Degle BJJ. And he's got a lot of great content, like I said at the outset of the podcast. And if you're at all interested in learning more about him, that's a great place to start. You can also find his instructionals on robertdeaglebjjonline.com. Again, that's robertdeaglebjjonline.com for all his educationals, which if you listen to how precise he is in our conversation, just imagine what those instructionals are going to be like. And then finally, guys, check out our sponsors again, Crown Rash Guards. You can find them at Crown Rash Guards on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find them at www.crownrashguards.com. Use our promo code BREWS for 20% off your next order. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We will catch you next week, same time, same place. Goodbye.